as a fundamental property of nature. Space, and this only makes sense if the world is a virtual construct. In a virtual world, distance doesn't look at correspondence, since all points in a simulation are equidistant with respect to the source of the simulation. For example, in a computer game, all points on the screen are equidistant with respect to the processor, and the same effect can be seen in our world. If our universe is a simulation projected onto a three-dimensional screen, then its processor would be equidistant to all points in the universe. Non-locality, one of the biggest problems in physics, is easily solved by the simulation hypothesis. Space seems to be an illusion created by the virtual construct. But even stranger than space being an illusion is what quantum physics tells us about matter itself.
If I were a character in a computer game that was so advanced that I were actually conscious, and I started exploring my video game world, it would actually feel to me like it was made of real solid objects, made of physical stuff. Yet if I started studying, as the curious physicist that I am, the properties of this stuff, the equations by which things move, and the equations that give them stuff its properties, I would discover eventually that all these properties were mathematical. The mathematical properties that the programmer had actually put into the software that describes everything.
The server that's created you is not in your reality frame. It's outside. If you're Sims, that computer is non-physical to you. What's physical to you is your Sims world.
Prior to observation, matter does not seem to exist. Matter seems to be the result of an interaction between consciousness and waves of potential. This has been demonstrated repeatedly in ever more precise versions of the double slit experiment, from the 1920s right up through the present. To understand the double slit experiment, you first need to know how particles behave. If we shoot small objects at a detector, we will see a clump pattern form where they went through the slit and impacted. If we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second clumping duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves go through the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the clump pattern. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. When the top of one wave meets the bottom of another, they interfere and cancel each other out. This results in an interference pattern on the back wall. Where the waves reinforce each other, they are at the highest intensity, the bright lines. And where they cancel each other out, there is nothing. So, when we fire objects through two slits, we get two clump patterns. But with waves, we get an interference pattern. An electron can be seen as a very small bit of matter. And when a stream of electrons is fired through one slit, they behave like small objects, forming a single clump pattern. So if we fire these bits of matter through two slits, we should get two clump patterns. But we don't. We get an interference pattern. We fire particles through, but we get a pattern like they're waves, not like little objects. How can pieces of matter create an interference pattern like waves? It doesn't make sense. At first, physicists thought that the electrons were bouncing off each other to create this interference pattern. So in 1961, Klaus Johnson at the University of Tübingen in Germany modified the experiment to fire the electrons through one at a time. This way, there is no possibility of them bumping into and interfering with each other. But again, the interference pattern was seen. Physicists were perplexed by this.
It somehow seems to have been aware of there being two slits, not one, because it's given rise to this interference pattern. How does one happen to do that? Does it split in half? Does it become like a cloud that goes through both?
The path taken by the photon is not an element of reality. We are not allowed to talk about the photon passing through this or this slit. Neither are we allowed to say that the photons pass through both slits. All this kind of language is not applicable.
So people modified the experiment to get to the bottom of the mystery. They put a measuring device at one slit to see which one the particle actually went through. But when the electrons were being this closely observed, they went back to behaving like little objects and produced a clump pattern, not an interference pattern. Somehow, the act of observation meant that they only went through one slit, not both. The electrons seemed to decide how to behave as if they were aware of being watched. How could this possibly be the case? Could the presence of a conscious observer be influencing the experiment?
Consciousness is information. It's an information field. It's data.
In 1978, physicist John Wheeler proposed a new way of doing the double slit experiment that might finally reveal what's really happening. He proposed what is called the delayed choice experiment, in which the decision of whether or not to observe the particles isn't made until after they've gone through the slits, but before they've impacted the detector. This animation is highly simplified, but you get the idea. Here comes the light. It travels through the double slit barrier as waves. The waves are past the slits but haven't yet hit the detector. And here comes the scientist. His eyes are closed. He's delaying his choice to make this an observed experiment. And then... the results of the experiment didn't solve the mystery. Instead, it got even stranger. Because what was found was that at the moment of decision to observe, the waves became particles. And not only that, but they actually made a record of themselves as having traveled through the slits as particles. Yes, you heard me. Deciding to run the observed experiment causes the waves to become particles, and this causal force extends backwards in time.
Our choice of what experiment to do determines the prior state of the electron.
Running the experiment unobserved does not cause the effect. When When John Wheeler first proposed adding the delayed choice protocol to the double slit experiment, he asked us to imagine a distant star that emits a photon billions of years ago and sends it towards the Earth. However, on the way, it must pass a dense galaxy. Gravitational lensing will make the light bend around the galaxy. Billions of years later, upon reaching the Earth, an astronomer chooses to use a binocular-type detector and focuses half of it on the left side of the galaxy and half of it on the right side. How the astronomer chooses to measure means the photon could only have taken one path and would display a clump pattern. So how we choose to observe in the present determines how the photon behaved billions of years ago. What John Wheeler had predicted was confirmed by the experiment. This doesn't make sense in a materialist worldview. It only makes sense if the universe is a simulation and all parts are equidistant in space-time with respect to the source of the simulation, like in a video game or a dream.
The force? And the force is what gives the Jedi power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
Max Planck famously said, "There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." One of the hottest ideas in cosmology is known as the holographic principle. It's the idea that our three-dimensional universe is emerging from 2D information. That is, three-dimensional objects are composed of information spread out on a two-dimensional surface, in the same way that a hologram produces a three-dimensional image from two-dimensional information. The holographic principle tells us something very surprising. It says that our ideas of volume, and in a sense, the world, might be a kind of illusion.
First of all, I would say it should be clear that this whole holographic story is the most radical thing that has happened to our understanding of space, time, matter, since the invention of quantum mechanics and relativity.
Quantum theory in general, and the results of the experiments that have been run in this area, reinforce the holographic principle. Is there any test that we could do to scientifically prove that the universe is a virtual construct and not materialist in nature? Well, you may think that scientists would have run out of ways to do the double slit experiment, but you'd be wrong. The delayed choice quantum eraser experiment was first performed in 1999 by Marlon Scully, Yoon-Ho Kim, and collaborators. Dr. Kim was consulted to ensure the accuracy of this presentation. The experiment begins in the top left corner with a photon source behind the barrier with two slits. A crystal is placed in front of the barrier which splits the photons into entangled pairs. This lens has the task of directing one of each pair, which can travel through either slit, so that they will impact at detector zero. When a photon comes through the first slit and is split into an entangled pair, one of them flies through the lens and into detector zero. The second flies downward and is redirected by the prism into the green half-silvered mirror. Half-silvered means that they allow light to pass through 50% of the time. The other 50% are reflected. So, on average, half of the photons are reflected up and impact detector 4. The other half simply travel through, reflect off a full mirror, and reach another half mirror. They can either travel through it and hit detector 1, or be reflected into detector 2. Photons traveling through the second slit are also split up into pairs, with one traveling down and redirected by the prism. At the first half mirror, 50% are reflected and impact detector 3. The others travel straight through and are reflected into the second half mirror. 50% of these travel through and impact detector 2. The other 50% are reflected and hit detector 1. So, all the photons that came from the first slit on the red path could only impact detectors 1, 2, and 4. They can never reach detector 3. All photons coming from the second slit, the blue path, can only impact detectors 1, 2, and 3, but never detector 4. So any photons hitting detector 4 must have traveled through the first slit, and any photons hitting detector 3 must have traveled through the second slit. For photons that impact detectors 1 and 2, it is impossible to determine which slit they came from, because these two detectors can be reached from either red or blue path. The path of their actual origin has been erased by the experimental setup. So what is the function of detector 0? The results of the experiment are related to the time it takes the photons to travel through the apparatus. The shorter the path, the faster the photon reaches the detector, and the shortest path is always to detector 0. So when the photons are split up into pairs, one of them is always recorded at detector 0 first, and then, with a delay, the partner photon hits one of the other detectors. The coincidence counter records the results of all 5 lasers. It establishes a connection between the measurements at detector 0 with the partner photons that reach detectors 1 through 4. This way, each single photon registered at detector 0 can be precisely assigned to a partner at the other detectors.
And it's for all the marbles, folks. They're playing for the entire universe. It's Plato versus Democritus. Idealism versus materialism. Head-to-head. Winner takes all.
Now, this apparatus can get moving along at a pretty good clip. So they fire a whole slew of photons through here, let the experiment run, gather plenty of data, and then run the analysis. And for the results, detectors 1 and 2 always show interference patterns because it's impossible to determine which of the two slits the photons came from. But detectors 3 and 4 always show clump patterns because we can know which slit these photons came from. That is the only difference. How the light chooses to display itself as particles or waves is dependent on how much we know about it. If it had to come from just one slit, clump pattern. It might have come from either slit, interference pattern. There is no materialist explanation for this. But even more mind-boggling is that the photons know beforehand which detector they will hit. How do we know this? Because of how the twin behaves at detector 0. Because the path to detector 0 is shortest, one of the split pair registers here first, before its twin ends up at any other detector. And whatever registers at detector 0 always correlates with where its twin ends up. So if the pair hits detector 3 or 4, detector 0 always displays a clump pattern. But if its twin lands at detectors 1 or 2, detector 0 always displays an interference pattern. Can Can the particle predict the future? Or is space-time a virtual construct with all time frames available simultaneously, the source of the simulation? Modern physics has definitely decided for Plato. The smallest units of matter are, in fact, not physical objects in the ordinary sense of the word. They are potential forms. In Plato's sense, abstract ideas which can only be described in the language of mathematics. Space and time are ideas as well, not absolute properties of nature. Science has decided. Materialism is not a valid worldview. Most physicists now accept that particles do not exist as objects in the absence of observation, but exist only as waves, which then form into particles when observed. These waves aren't anything tangible like ocean waves or even radio waves, but simply a probabilistic description of where the particles might be if they were checked on.
Particles are probability distributions, not little hard things. But when you measure them, like measure which slit they go through, you get a particle.
The wave that forms into a particle is only a wave of potentiality. This is what Werner Heisenberg said many years ago. The atoms or elementary particles themselves are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than one of things or facts. When you look, they appear. When you're not looking, they don't necessarily exist. This situation seems very odd until you compare it to what you see in a computer simulation. A video game gives you the frame that you need when you're looking there. When you navigate around and look at something else, it creates and gives you that frame. Oddly enough, the universe behaves the same way. Our world really does seem to be pixelated, and it only assumes definite form when observed. The very same way computer simulations behave. This is why the simulation hypothesis is now taken seriously by an increasing number of experts.
I personally find that I gravitate more to the information theoretic point of view and believing that the universe that I exist in is a very good, high-quality simulation.
Some folks have tried to salvage objective reality and materialism by claiming that the quantum realm operates on a separate set of rules that don't apply to the macro world of our daily experience. This idea is called macro-realism. The scientists Leggett and Gard proposed an idea similar to Bell's theorem, known as an inequality, to test whether there is a limit on quantum effects. But in 2011, a team led by Stephanie Simmons and George Nee experimentally demonstrated violations of the Leggett-Gard inequality. And these results have been duplicated many times since then, showing that macro reality emerges from quantum reality. So you can't separate the two. Reality is all emerging from the same source and operates by the same rules at all levels. The double slit experiment has been successfully performed with larger objects such as atoms, molecules, and even buckyballs, spherical structures made of 60 carbon atoms. Scientists are currently designing experiments to do this with mid-sized proteins and viruses. Non-local entanglement has been recorded between pairs of small diamonds, aluminum chips big enough to be seen with the naked eye. A small metal paddle has even been placed into a state of non-local superposition. As of February 2015, macro-realism has failed every single experimental test. The fact that quantum effects exist at the macro level is what makes quantum computing possible, and quantum computing takes place on a daily basis at Dr. Seth Lloyd's MIT Qubit laboratory. The idea that you can prevent the downfall of materialism by claiming that the macro world is separate from the quantum world simply doesn't work. Reality is all emerging from the same source. So, is the quantum realm different?
No different. Only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned.
Okay, fine. So the science says that we may really be living in a simulation. But what does that mean? Am I being kept alive in one of those scary pod things from the Matrix? Is my brain sitting in a jar somewhere with wires hooked up to it? Is someone else in control of my thoughts, feelings, and dreams? Why is all of this so mysterious and difficult to understand? Wouldn't the Creator want me to know what's going on? Is the Creator afraid to expose their true intentions? Is he hiding from us? Why? Why won't he reveal himself?
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain!
What if part of your subconscious is still connected to the original consciousness that programmed this virtual reality? After all, we know that our subconscious can create a physical experience for us while we sleep.
Genuine inspiration, right? Now, in a dream, our mind continuously does this. We create and perceive our world simultaneously. Our mind does this so well that we don't even know what's happening. I don't know a single scientist who would disagree with the statement that the world is exceedingly ingenious. Not just mathematical, not just beautiful, not just elegant, but the manifestation of something truly extraordinary.
Albert Einstein was one of the smartest people who ever lived. In 1 year, he wrote 4 of the most important papers in the history of physics and introduced sweeping changes that ushered in technologies ranging from lasers to the global positioning system. At the end of his life, after spending 28 years searching for a unified field theory built on materialism, Einstein seemed to change his mind about the fundamental nature of the universe.
Is everything here created by God? Well, yes, if God's the larger consciousness system. Yes.
If we can all agree on one thing, it should be that science means discovery.
That's good. You've taken the first step into a larger world.
Quantum laser pointers brings you the infamous double slit experiment right in the palm of his hand.
QuantumLaserPointers.com.
Something comes into the brain that's chasing and fires at it. What the hell could do that? This time, on Unexplained Mysteries, Undercover UFO, we'll investigate important clues that prove the government is engaged in a massive UFO cover-up.
Our government has flat out lied to us for 40 years or more.
We'll show you the government's distortion of the truth. That's flying through your teeth to the American. The military's mysterious black projects based on alien technology.
It is this otherworldly technology that's being applied to Air Force Black projects.
The scientist who was ordered to study an alien UFO.
Our group basically was to back engineer them and see how it was fabricated and try and duplicate some of that technology with earthly materials.
The military cover-up of a dangerous UFO threat to our nuclear air bases. Whatever this was flying around could this penetrate all these defenses at will. And the government's use of threats and fear to suppress the truth.
The powers that be knew I was talking to you. It would be a high price for me to pay.
You'll find out why the government is reluctant to admit the possible existence of life on other planets.
The reason being that it could cause widespread social unrest and possible deterioration of government control.
You'll hear from witnesses of saucer-shaped craft that would have been designed and built by the Air Force.
My gosh, those are flying saucers. Those things really do exist.
And we'll give you our final analysis in O'Connor's report as we uncover the government's UFO conspiracy on Unexplained Mysteries, Undercover UFOs. Since the first sighting of a UFO, evidence suggests the U.S. government has lied to the American public to cover up the existence of alien spacecraft.
Our government has flat out lied to us for 40 years or more. They've threatened people and intimidated people. They've spied on UFO groups, infiltrated UFO groups, spied on researchers, compiled dossiers. Their response is bordered on paranoia. The CIA says that it does not collect information on UFOs, and it hasn't since the 50s. There are reams of documents squeezed out of the CIA that indicate that they have on-staff CIA UFO experts, agency personnel monitoring the situation on an ongoing basis. They're locked.
The Air Force studied UFOs closely. A squadron of pilots had a unique mission: find and photograph UFOs. Pilot Guy Kirkwood witnessed an amazing scene. 16 unidentified objects 2 miles away.
They broke rank and they started moving all over. They were below us, they were above us, they were out above us, and accelerating, literally at lightning speed. And a dot in the distance, maybe several miles away from you at that point, maybe a pencil point, all of a sudden closing on you at the rate of several thousand miles an hour, and a 36-foot object, which is basically almost the same size as our aircraft, 36-foot wingspan. But all of a sudden this thing is just closing on you faster than you're able to think.
The Air Force suddenly terminated the UFO search squadrons. Years later, Kirkwood started talking about what he saw, and 2 government agents accosted him.
And they said, well, the government doesn't like the information being released, and to continue could be detrimental to your health.
UFO experts maintain that the U.S. government conducts research at a top-secret base in Nevada, known as Area 51. An aerospace engineer who worked there could not believe what he saw.
Got out of the bus, I was told to walk directly through the hangar, and immediately, even before entering the hangar, you can see the edge of a disc. This is your classic flying saucer, two inverted pie plates, if you wish.